Penguin Random House Audio presents The Chinese Groove by Kathryn Ma. Read for you by James Chen. 1. Eastward Ho. The relatives treated me rudely, beating me and calling me names. And so on my 18th birthday, my father buried his head in his hands and cried until the bottle was empty and his tears were spent, and he was at last decided. It was time to let me go. Grubs like us didn't get many chances, and he'd promised Mother before she died that he'd send me, their son and only child, away from this unhappy life and into a brighter world. There was an uncle, he said, conveniently rich, living in San Francisco. I should leave our home in Gezhou, Yunnan Province, the most beautiful realm in all of China, and move in with uncle and figure out from there, foot in the door and student visa and green card, and a score of other words my father called out in the weeks that followed, as I cleaned our shoes and boiled our broth and swept our single room, words that made no sense to me, but ladled not an ounce of care into my black-haired head. I was all for the plan. Bathed in Mother's dream for me, I'd been waiting for years to depart. I didn't want to be like my friends who were lined up to work at the beautiful Objet d'Art and World Crafts tin factory. Theirs wasn't the fate for me. My future lay outside those gates. For where in a factory could I become the man I intended to be, which was a cool guy and a poet? I told my father, yes. The relatives hated me for ancestor reasons, which you might think unfair, but I well understood because I was born into the despised branch of the family. My great-grandfather, a handsome devil, was known to all as the wayward son of his father's third wife, a gambler and an opium addict. The son, not the wife, though, who knows? Maybe the third wife ate the flower too. In the photo my father has of her, she's really skinny. My father knew how tough it was to be the bastard son of the bastard son of a bastard. Okay, maybe not that many bastards, and technically untrue. Third wives were all the rage in the ancient days of yore to those with brains and money. But as far as the aunties were concerned, Father and I were lodged on the lowest rung of the family ladder, and nothing we could do would lift us from the mud. I thank my many cousins for teaching me that lesson, for it was their whirling wallops upside my youthful head and their painful pinches along my bony arms that resolved me with every bluing to move far away, earn a lot of money, and stride the earth as a man. They didn't mean to do me any favors, but, in fact, they did, as you're about to discover. From where I stood in proud Gezhou, tin capital of China, but lousy with kicking cousins, I couldn't quit soon enough. I'd hold Father in a warm embrace and promise to make him proud. Then I'd soar straight to Uncle's house, where my new family was waiting. Cousin Deng, the only one who was ever kind to me, though he was 5 years older, swore to me that poets in the U.S. made a ton of dough, which I was glad to know since I'd promised my girlfriend, Lisbeth, right before she left me, that I'd become a poet and write 3 splendid poems just for her. Cousin Deng told me that poets in America got fancy cars and special housing, revered as they were by their fellow citizens as keepers of the famous American freedoms. Thus, my foolproof plan took shape. I'd head to California, settle myself at Uncle's, polish up my English, already A+, and win Lisbeth back. 6 months after my birthday, during which time Cousin Deng employed me so I could buy meat for Father along with our healthy veg, Father told me that he'd gotten the funds I needed from his boss at the bus depot, and he'd written to my uncle in San Francisco who'd said okay. but for only 2 weeks, since he was a busy guy and they didn't have an extra bedroom. "Don't worry," said Father. "They're going to love you so much they'll never want you to leave." He wiped his eyes in a tremble of sadness. We agreed that Uncle was being modest about the extra bedroom because all Americans have way more space than they need, except for the chaps who live under the highways, and even they have the prairie. I chose January 3 as the perfect date to depart. Father wanted me to wait until after Lunar New Year, but in San Francisco, 2015 had already started. I didn't need to wait for the year of the ram to begin. Though I'm one of the friendliest fellows you'll ever likely to know, and one of the sincerest, circumstances permitting, I consider it my bastard back then birthright to buck the mooing herd. Just when every other person in the vast nation where I was born would be making their annual pilgrimage to return to the family pen, I'd be leaping sure-footedly, peak to peak, a big-horned sheep, king of the craggy Rockies, if the Rockies began where the Golden Gate stood. I packed in a jiffy. I had no difficulty deciding what to take because everything I owned fit into one suitcase, a sparkly pink affair that belonged to Cousin Deng and before that to his mother. At midnight, my father came home and threw his arm around my neck and cried fat tears, half salt, half whiskey, that I was going away and he'd never see me again. He cursed the day he'd promised my mother that I would learn English, which she believed I needed to succeed in the modern world, though that was when she was alive and I was little, and given how times have changed, can we say it's true anymore? No matter. What I'm telling you is this. On the eve of my departure, Father cursed the promise, cursed the loss, cursed the grief that held him. He didn't curse my mother. She was his paragon. I coaxed Father onto the bed and covered him with the quilted blanket I spread over him every night, talking to him the whole time about how as soon as money started to flow into my pockets, I would send him enough for his very own laptop and ask Deng to teach him how to use it. That with his new computer, we would talk to each other day or night, for as far as I was concerned, any hour was good for a confabulation, father to son to father. Better yet, I said, I'll find someone from right here in Gejiao who is traveling back home to choose a pretty wife or bury a dead parent. Fellow countrymen, I'll say, could you kindly deliver straight into my father's hands this latest Apple device with all the bells and whistles? And wherever I roam, Father, you need only to tell it to find me, and it will track me to the very pinpoint of globe where I squat. I'll appear to you so clearly on its magic screen that you'll smell my zesty breath and want to kiss me on the tip of my honking Zheng family nose. When you show the relatives the tricks your Apple can do, they'll gnaw their knuckles in envy. I waited. He was supposed to grin and reply, I read you. This was our custom, our coded handshake dating back from when I was a kid and my mother was too sick to scrub my neck or cook my supper. She lay in bed, stifling her groans so as not to scare me while my father warmed my breakfast, buttoned my jacket, cinched the strap on my backpack, amusing me the whole time by telling me how, when my mother was my age, she had speckled legs whenever it rained because she couldn't resist a good puddle, and how he never would have dared to ask her for a date until she cornered him after school and told him that if he didn't ask her out, she would tell his mother that he had cheated on the maths test, which he had. So he did. Father and I were always in balance. I sat on his handlebars as we weaved our way to school, and after we parted, me on the school step, he to the bus depot, I waved to him for a full minute, watching the gray square of his jacket glide into the stream of traffic until it merged with all the other greys, from which then would emerge at the end of the school day my...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?